My topic for Project 1 and now Project 2 is racism in education. The four stakeholders I will use for this project are the anti-racist resources from the San Francisco Unified School District and the United Educators of San Francisco Close the Gap Coalition, Yvonne Dong, and Brice Portillo's view on racist comments made by San Francisco School Board Commissioner Ann Sue's comments, and Amos Brown's view on racist text messages sent to San Francisco students. The reason I picked these specifically is that they go above and beyond trying to help with my topic. Starting with SFUSD, they compiled resources that will help you with your problems and show you how to find help. Next, Close the Gap's goal is to address causes, effects, and solutions to fix the opportunity gaps within SFUSD public schools. And the third stakeholder is two students, Yvonne Dong and Brice Portillo, and their perspective on Ann Sue's controversial comments. And my last stakeholder will be Amos Brown, whose goal is to pretty much end racial comments within schools. The fault line for this project is San Francisco, California. This project will present the viewpoints of UEOSF, SFUSD, Yvonne Dong, and Brice Portillo, and Amos Brown on their position on how racism in education is still affecting our school system to this day, for the topic of racism in education in San Francisco.
Institutions hire faculty of color. They want diversity, but they may not be willing to change their racist policies and practices. Equity requires colleges to revise their policies and practices and make them responsive to the racism that faculty of color experience.
For my first claim, I'll be going over that Thomas D. Fallis thinks that the educators of the 20th century viewed scientific racism as an evolving idea, and while their views were usually contradictory, SFUSD's anti-racist resources help clarify these views. This section supports the introduction and thesis statement by giving a background on how educational racism developed over time. Using SFUSD's anti-racism resources, everyone can get educated and help if needed. With more parents and students being well informed about racism in our schooling, we would see the 20th century's view of racial determinism become a thing of the past. For example, in Fallis's text, he points out how academics like Franz Boas challenged the idea of racial determinism, stating that racial characteristics are built on personal actions and not hereditary. We see this idea today with SFUSD's compiled resources against systematic racism, and being able to find these resources so easy on Asian Americans and Pacific Islander, Black Lives Matter, makes facing academic racism easier than before. For my second claim, I will be going over Zeus Leonardo and how he discussed the idea of a racial contract and how it is written within our society, like the situation with Yvonne Dong and Brice Portillo. This section supports the introduction and thesis statement by giving an example of how racism in education affects our classrooms. Using Zeus Leonardo's idea of the racial contract, we can see that to this day, there is a racial construct within our institutions. We see this with the reactions of SFUSD students when Board Commissioner Ann Sue stated that Black and brown families do not adequately support their children's educations. Ann Sue's comments show how racism is written within our society. An example of this is seen through the two students at SFUSD. The first student, Brice Portillo, said it was kind of like a slap in the face, and I think racism should not be tolerated at all. And the second student, Yvonne Dong, wrote, It's really concerning to know that she would write that when she's supposed to represent all communities. These two students' reactions show us how racism affects schools today and how Zeus Leonardo's idea of racial contracts is still integrated within our society.
Right? So that the racial contract is also a metaphor or a mechanism through which we may think about the world. So this is the common sense that takes the spirit of the contract as its assumptive form. In short, what can...
My third claim will be focusing on Antar A. Tichavakunda and how he noted that the idea of bad faith can create racial tendencies, just like how we see Amos Brown respond to the racial messages that were sent to San Francisco students. The academic article was produced by Antar Tichavakunda, supports the introduction and thesis because he explains how bad faith can cause racism in education. We see this with the way Amos Brown reacts to the racist messages sent to San Francisco students in 2024. Brown is quoted as saying, "This is like a forest fire that is burning in the city and nation." This leads to the belief that students of bad faith can send these horrific texts. To back these ideas, we can see other examples of reactions to these messages at the same time. These texts show that Antar Tichavakund's idea of faith contributing to racism is proven. Along with Amos, the mayor put out a statement saying racist messages sent to members of the African American community, including SFUSD students, are unacceptable and remind us of the work needed to ensure our Black community feels safe, valued, and supported. Showing within the bad faith, there are some who are up to the task of standing against it. My fourth claim illustrates Lily Wong's idea of how diversity is causing us to become more and more divided instead of united, just like UEOSF's mission to create an opportunity gapless SFUSD school system. Her article supports the introduction and thesis by showing that diversity is causing us to become divided instead of united. Lily Wong's ideas add to what UEOSF wants to do in the school systems in San Francisco. The author writes about how we should be less diverse and more together, just like the United Educators of San Francisco want, with no difference in opportunities, no matter the race. This coalition helps the idea of unity by trying to close the gap between races. Their programs have helped countless students across San Francisco get similar opportunities to others. An example of this is one student named Angelica Babcock got her help prepping for college and even got a scholarship. And she stated saying, "Close the gap provided me with so many opportunities, even holding up with a mentor from Amazon who has helped me with my college application." Thus showing that Close the Gap helps students all around San Francisco. The fifth claim looks at UEOSF's main interest is to address the causes, effects, and solutions to fix the opportunity gaps within SFUSD public schools. UEOSF's interest in racism in education is shown through their Close the Gap coalition. This branch focuses on ending the opportunity gap within San Francisco high schools. UEOSF stands for the United Educators of San Francisco, so it is inevitable that they are intertwined within racism in education. They've decided to take care of the three main ideas: encouraging parent and family involvement, providing more specialized help, and ensuring reliable resources for students in need. Expanding on this, Close the Gap helps within the school system as seen through student examples, and an example of this is Brianna Reed, a student within SFUSD who got a laptop gifted to them. She noted that with the laptop provided to her, she can take her classes online without having to put herself in harm's way going to in-person classes. And with her situation, we can see how UEOSF help students who are affected by racism in education. For the sixth claim, I will be talking about SFUSD's help through resources that they have compiled, making finding help against racism in education easier. SFUSD is the school district of San Francisco, making them in charge of protecting the students within it. SFUSD acts against racism in education with resources to make finding help easier for all. These resources have a section for pretty much all races and ethnicities, helping anyone facing racial problems within education. Beyond these resources, we can see how helpful it can be for both sides of the coin. The resources both provide information for the affected and the affectors. Being able to educate the affectors and help the affected would help reduce racism in education as a whole. And the importance of this is shown when the superintendent of SFUSD put out a statement saying, "Let me be very clear. There is no place for anti-Black racism or bigotry of any kind in our community." Being a big part of creating the anti-racist resources, we see how important the stance against racism in education is within San Francisco.
It responded with a statement saying racism and bigotry have no place in our community and will not be tolerated. We take any report of racism very seriously. We actively work to implement anti-racist practices across our schools and in our community.
My seventh claim focuses on SFUSD students Yvonne Dong and Bercice Portillo's reaction to racist remarks made by the school board commissioner. This section supports the introduction and thesis by showing a real-life example of racism in education. Having these two students who witnessed and shared statements on the situation shows us the effect racism can have, especially when it's done from someone in a high position like a board commissioner. The different reactions Yvonne Dong and Bercice Portillo had showed that how other communities of color react differently to different situations. The reaction from Yvonne and Bercice showed the impact that blatant racism has on the SFUSD community. These two students agreed that they have seen stereotypes at play within their school, and they are worried that Sue's views would exacerbate those divisions, thus showing that the impact of racism in education and how it affects students within the schools. My eighth claim will be looking at Amos Brown's statement regarding to the racist texts that were sent to some San Francisco students, showing his interest within racism in education. This section supports the introduction and thesis by giving another real-life example of how racism in education affects people. Amos Brown, in his statement, touched on how we need to get rid of this nation's demon of division, racism, and incivility. His reaction shows how serious the problem is to San Francisco and why everyone should try to help the cause. Expanding upon this idea, Amos's position on this situation shows how impactful racism is in the school system. Mr. Brown's reaction fished out statements from the mayor of SFUSD as a whole, even saying San Francisco is a beacon for diversity and inclusion, and we will not tolerate hate in our city. And the mayor is also quoted as saying racist texts have no place in San Francisco and are unacceptable. The reactions from these important groups and people show how important the battle against racism is within education to San Francisco.
And make sure that we exercise, that we rid this nation from this demon of division, racism, and incivility.
In conclusion, this project followed the viewpoints of UEOSF, SFUSD, Yvonne Dong, Bercice Portillo, and Amos Brown, while following academic sources from Thomas D. Fallis, Zeus Leonardo, Antar A., T'Challa Kunda, and Lily Wong, to show how racism in education is still affecting our school system to this day. This final section supports the introduction and thesis by giving them both closure. Restating the stakeholders and resources gives a summary of what we've done over the short film. The stakeholders and resources both add to each other, making a pair that is more credible to the topic of racism in education in San Francisco. These stakeholders and sources within our text were UEOSF, SFUSD, Yvonne Dong, Bracis Portillo, Amos Brown, Thomas D. Fallis, Zeus Leonardo, Antar A. Tichavakunda, and Lily Wong. The different viewpoints and ideas of these stakeholders and sources give different perspectives, adding to the base idea of racism, and more specifically, racism in education within San Francisco.